The federal government just decided we're going to split the tip. Hi, I'm Scott Ott with Stephen Green and Bill Whittle, and this episode of Right Angles brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, the federal government has some rules going into effect in about 60 days that would say that servers and other workers who receive tips could be required by their employer to share that gratuity with non-tipped staff members such as dishwashers or janitors or other people in the back of the house, so to speak. This is a Labor Department regulation. According to Cheryl Stanton, the Labor Department's wage and hour administrator, and I'm getting this story, by the way, from the Wall Street Journal. According to this Labor Department spokesperson, she said this could increase pay for back-of-the-house workers like cooks and dishwashers who have been excluded from participating in tip pools in the past, and it could reduce wage disparities among all workers who contribute to the customer's experience. Now, Bill, you know that income inequality is a major concern here at BillWhittle.com and at Right Angle.
And I plan to keep it that way.
That's right. And we're doing our part to make sure that we're not lording it over others out in the American populace by having a much higher income than they are. So in any case, this is the Trump administration Labor Department basically saying to employers, you can tell your tipped staff now that we're going to split that income with the people who don't typically get tipped. Do you see any problems with this? Or I guess another question would be kind of, why does the federal government need to get involved in this?
Anytime you start a sentence with the federal government proposes or is getting involved, I generally have a problem with it. You pretty much could stop there. There's an expression that waiters have when you're overloaded, they say you're in the weeds. And I was a waiter for 2 months, maybe. I walked into the job, I walked into the weeds, and then when I quit 2 months later, I walked out of the weeds, and the entire time I was there, I was in the weeds. I was the worst waiter that ever lived, ever. But I certainly remember during those times, and certainly the people I waited on will not forget them either, where it seemed to me that, if I remember correctly, that was just something that you did. You know, it was just something that all the wait staff did, was that you took some percentage of the tips and shared them with the bus boys or the dishwashers, whatever the case may be. But the bottom line is this: when you accept a job, you accept a job. You accept the pay rate, you accept the conditions, and that's it. I'm not without sympathy to this, and I'll get to that in just 1 second. But fundamentally, the entire idea of a tip is that it is a reward for the interaction. It's the interaction survey. You don't tip anybody you don't see. Let's put it that way, right? You never tip somebody who you never see. The only time you tip somebody is somebody you interact with directly. You tip a cab driver or an Uber driver. You tip the guy who delivers, food for you, Postmates if you want to, or pizza guy. You never tip the guy who's not interacting with you. And that's supposed to work, and it usually does work, as an incentive to provide, better service, more polite, faster service, and it's really overall pretty effective. And so unfortunately, dishwashers and barbacks and busboys and all the rest of them don't really fall into that category. And that's the job. And frankly, when things are this tough for restaurants, and so many restaurants are closing because of these insane government restrictions, I think the government should be letting everybody keep as much money as they possibly can. And the last thing they should be doing is trying to explain to people who are just barely hanging on by their fingernails how much more of their money they have to give up one way or another. Now, with that said, my dad was a hotel manager, and when he first got to this hotel in Bermuda where I grew up, they had a real problem with not being able to get the orders turned around fast enough. And he soon figured out that the problem was with the dishwashers, that they just weren't moving quickly enough. And my dad went back there and he realized that the only people in the entire hotel that didn't have uniforms of any kind at all were the dishwashers. And he got them some relatively comfortable uniforms and said, you guys are just as important as you. This hotel stops without you. If these dishes and stuff aren't turned around fast enough, then it just stops. You're as important as anybody here, and that made a huge difference. Now you can say, well, that's great. I'm sure they would have rather had the money, but what what I'm getting at with that story is that my father understood as a hotel manager that it is in fact a total effort on the part of everybody. And if there's a weak link in the chain, then you have to address that weak link. And you can't pretend that weak link isn't there, because the hotel will close otherwise if the dishwashers aren't working fast enough. So all I would say is, if you've got dishwashers who are uncontented or discontented or not moving fast enough, or if they're feeling sullen and resentful because waiters are making so much more than them and so on, it's in your interest as the owner of the restaurant to pay them as much as you can, even if you don't do it continuously, just the occasional bonus or something to let them know that they're appreciated. But any good manager, and there are not really that many of them left anymore, understands that employees are your primary asset. They're not a liability, and that you should be paying them as much as you can. And like the price on anything else, Scott, there is a sweet spot there. You know, you can sell Nikes for $2,000 a pair and sell fewer of them, or you can sell them for $20 a pair and sell more of them. But there is a sweet spot price. It's around $200, where you are making the most money by moving the most products at the highest available price. Same goes for employees. And if you are having problems with employees and they're upset and they're slowing down, it's in your interest as the business owner to pay them to the sweet spot. And that should be something that is entirely voluntary, because it is entirely predicated on the uniqueness of the restaurant and the market that you're in, the quality of their wait staff, the number of the wait staff, all of it. So why don't we just let the restaurant owners run their own restaurants? And if they're the kind of people that are sitting on profits, which is not the case in restaurants as a general rule, and not paying it to people like barbacks and dishwashers, and it's hurting their business, then they deserve to go out of business.
Now, Stephen Green, it almost sounds like restaurant owners themselves have been lobbying for this change, because effectively the federal government is saying you can now divide up the tips. Some more detail to flesh this out a little bit more. The rule only allows gratuity pooling, that sharing of the tips, if the tipped employee is paid the full federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. That's $7.25 an hour. Under federal law, if you're a tipped employee, you can be paid as little as $2.13 an hour, as long as your tips bring that up to $7.25 an hour. I've been a dishwasher and briefly got a turn or two at being a waiter. I never really had the personality for that, but I've worked in the back of the house, Steve. That's a lot of hard work for $7.25 an hour. What do you think of this idea of the federal government essentially caving to the demands of restaurant owners to say, yeah, go ahead and take the money from the guy who's been out there pitching it and divide that up among the people who have been in the back doing something that any robot could do?
Yeah, wow. I know a Moyle with less interest in tips than the Department of Labor suddenly has. I don't get this at all. Our non-Jewish viewers can look that up in their free time after this segment.
Please don't.
Yeah, the whole point of tipping is to say thank you for personal service. I eat out as often as I can because I enjoy it. I also enjoy cooking, so I do that as often as I can. It's hard to split that difference, which is my way of saying life is good, and I appreciate both sides of that. Actually, let me say something else before I really get into this. I know there are a lot of people who just can't eat out like they used to, or can't eat out anymore. And whether it's because they're out of work because of this damn COVID lockdowns, or because the restaurants they enjoy have been put out of business by these damn COVID lockdowns, there is a lot less eating out these days. So there's a lot less opportunity for personal service. So let me give you a little example of just that. I was picking up dinner for the family at a local place in Colorado Springs, and I won't name the place, and you'll understand why when I tell you this story. But I did my due diligence as I walked up to the door, and I put my mask on because there's the state mandated sticker on the door that says mask required for entry. It's got this spooky, like neo-fascist looking emblem on there. And
was this called the German Laundry? Is that the name of the restaurant?
Yeah,
Das
papers
German
required for entry. And I go to the bar, which is the only thing open, and you see this site. It's so familiar now, especially if you're in a blue state like I am now in Colorado, or Bill is in California, or New York, where you walk into a restaurant to pick up your food, and number one, there are hardly any tables in there, and number two, the chairs are all stacked up on the tables like it's after closing time, and it's just sad. But I went to the manager, who I'm at this place frequently enough that we know each other by name, and they're getting my food ready. And that's when I notice that in the far back of the restaurant, there are 2 tables with people sitting at them, and that there are patrons at the bar with no masks on. And Colorado is at what it is officially now a code red, where there is no indoor dining. The bars are closed, but here we are with a little revolt going on in southern Colorado, where a couple of tables that you can't see from the front door, that you can't see from the window, are occupied. That the patrons sitting at the closed bar are enjoying cocktails and conversation with no masks on. And I look at the manager and I say, wow, this is kind of great. And as I'm saying this, I'm taking off my mask so we can actually enjoy some small talk. And the manager says to me through their mask, people have just had it. And they really have. And I did the same thing I've been doing every time I pick up food from anywhere. I'm not getting the personal service. I'm still tipping. Not 15%, not 18%. I'm putting 50% tips on these tabs because there's not even a waiter there. But another restaurant I know actually started a GoFundMe this Christmas to raise money for their employees who have been laid off. And of course, my wife and I'm getting choked up over this. I'm sorry. You tip for the personal service, and the bad side of that is waiters and waitresses get this sub-minimum wage. The people in the back of the kitchen, it's been my understanding for as long as I've known any of this, that they get tipped out at the end of the night, every night, from the community tip pool. So I don't understand what is going on here at all. This idea of tipping people who are already getting a cut, and on a good night, that could be a fairly generous cut, who are not making sub-minimum wage. This is just, it's all nonsense, all of it. This idea that there's a federal minimum wage when the actual minimum wage, as we all know, is zero. A sub-minimum wage for certain people, that certain people who are getting the sub-minimum wage are now supposed to provide extra tips on top of their nightly tip out for... This is such a case, and I understand this is happening under the Trump administration's Department of Labor, but this is such a case that once the left establishes a power apparatus like a Department of Labor, it doesn't really matter who the president is or who the secretary of any particular department is. The apparatus, the actual functioning of this department is going to continue, and it's going to increase, and it's just going to meddle and meddle and meddle and meddle and meddle more and more and more, no matter who's putatively in charge, until we're all just incapable of moving or doing anything.
Well, once again, we're frustrated by the federal government stepping in where it doesn't belong. But I think what's more embarrassing and frankly shameful about this is private businesses lobbying the federal government to say, hey, we want you to say that it's okay for us to do this. And, going kind of hat in hand to the federal government. Long ago, Pat Toomey wrote a book, and I think this was before he was Senator Pat Toomey. No. It was right after he became senator. He said nobody ever came into his office asking if they could, except to ask if they could get some sort of a deal, some sort of a break, some sort of a subsidy or whatever. Nobody ever comes there asking him to cut back government spending or to raise their taxes or anything like that. It's only people who are coming to them asking for a favor. The fact that individual business people who used to be at least the heart and soul of this free market economy would be going hat in hand to the federal government and saying, hey, can you make some rules that allow us to do something like this? To me, that's despicable. I've always been fascinated by the fact that so many people who make their living from tips don't realize what they have. They don't realize the opportunity for, to use an old term, to sing for their supper. They don't see the value of the interaction with the customer, and they just kind of show up and they bring the food and they go away. I have this thing that annoys the heck out of my wife and kids at this point, but when a waiter comes to the table at the end of the meal and says, "Hey, did you save room for dessert?" I always thought that was one of the most absurd things that anybody's ever said. Yes, I've just devoured like a hubcap-sized steak and a pile of mashed potatoes of Vesuvian proportions. And now you're asking me if I saved room, yes, in my fourth bovine stomach over here for dessert. So I've actually said to about 25 wait people so far, probably, maybe more than this. I said, you know what? I'm in sales myself. I used to be a sales trainer. Do you mind if I give you a little suggestion? And they said, sure. No, what's that? And I said, instead of waiting till the end of the meal after I'm already gorged and asking me if I saved room for dessert, why don't you pitch the dessert up front? Before you even take my order, say, by the way, we have a great key lime pie here and you'll want to save room for that. Okay? So, and then when you bring out say, hey, would you like me to get you a takeout container so that you still have room to eat dessert? And then if they don't do that, at the end of the meal, what you do is you say, hey, would you like to take your dessert with you or eat it here? And I said, people will do this. And people, in fact, if it's in the middle of the day, ask them if they'd like to take some dessert back to the office to share with others. People will do this and your tips will go up. That's how you make your money in a tip market. 25 times at least, I've said this to a waiter. Once did the woman turn around and say to me, by the way, would you like to eat your dessert here or take it with you? I get choked up now thinking about that woman. She's America. She learned. She listened. And what was I to do at that point? What do you think I did? I took dessert with me. I was not planning to buy dessert at all. Not only did I take dessert with me, but I tipped her more than I ordinarily would have, not just on the meal plus the dessert, but a little bit more, as Bill and Steve have indicated. So that ability to sell yourself is underrated, I think, by most people who are in the waiting profession. But even worse is the people who own the businesses that employ the wait staff, who don't seem to understand that their entire reputation stands at that table wearing an apron. And you better wake up to that, because there's a business opening down the street that understands that it's that person wearing the apron, not only standing at the table, but the person wearing the rubber apron standing in front of the hot sink in the back who makes that business. It's the person that you think is expendable and dispensable that you can just churn through and get another dishwasher every month that's going to destroy your business. But if you learn how to treasure those people and value them and pay them according to their value, you'll have a lasting business that will grow and multiply. For Stephen Green and Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.